Hello, everyone. So today presentation, we will go really through a contamination control strategy and explain a little bit about the ECA guideline and how to fill this guideline and the template that has been developed by the ECA. Like I said, the idea behind the template is more to give for the manufacturer a certain structure, but at the end, you are the only one who knows your process. And therefore, you may need to adapt the template based on your processes. So the guideline is available now. And in the guideline, there is a template for a gap assessment that I will discuss, but also a template of a CCS documentation. Annex 1 is now effective. And so when it was published in March 2022, so before the Annex 1 was effective. There is a version 2 that is in review. So just to make sure that if there is anything needs to be adapted, it needs to be adapted. The link is in the slide. You will have the slide at the end of the presentation. Until today, we had more than 1,500 downloads. So hopefully after this presentation, we will have a bit more. It's still the first that is available on the market, let's say like that, as a CCS document. However, I am part also of the A3P. It's a French association, and a PHSS, which is an English association that is developing also a UK-based association, that is developing also a CCS guidelines. PDA is also developing a contamination control technical report that should be published around October, and also SPE. So the task for objectives of the CCA was really to create a guidelines that provide high-level information on how to create and document a CCS. We did not want it to enter into the detail of each element that is listed into the Annex 1 and how you should perform your contamination control or design your contamination control program, because that should be the manufacturer based on, and we will see based on the different source of contamination to assess what are the controls that needs to be put in place. Just as a reminder, the scope of the Annex 1 is for sterile manufacturing, a sterile product type, like active systems, equipment. Primary packaging is also being part of the effective Annex 1 and the finished doses. You may utilize the Annex 1 for bioburden control processes or final product, or even non-sterile. But if you elect to use some of the guideline, you need to make sure you are complying with the guideline Annex 1. In the ECA, we design it into a 3-stage process for the documentation of your CCS. And the idea behind is, and we will see it after, is based on the manufacturer maturity on contamination control. The step 1 will be around developing the CCS, and that would mean, or reviewing or even refining based on your maturity, but that would mean the process of mapping your process, identifying the risk of contaminations, and also what are the elements and the document that are present into your quality system that can be leveraged for this part. As you know, in the Annex 1, there is 3, or we called it in the ECA, 3 levels of requirement. The first level is a requirement that is what they call it in the effective version, a guideline or a value or guidance value. I don't remember exactly the name. And then there is a level B, what we call it a written expectation. So for example, you have to do a daily BOEDIC to demonstrate air removal in your autoclave. And then we have a level C, which is more implicit or not clear requirement. So for example, you have to perform a historical EM data. What is the frequency? What is etc. is not explicitly expressed. Then the stage 2 is really around the CCS document. So that's mean compiling all the different elements. And we will go into the deep dive of what are the elements that you need to compile into your CCS and what are the documents that you want to refer from your CCS. And then we have the stage 3 that is more around evaluation of your CCS. And the goal here is to demonstrate what you have put in place is working, and to have this holistic view and holistic approach. I will be discussing around the future challenges that I think will face with the industry will face around how to demonstrate holistic control, while we are currently performing more into a either a siloed or a two-level model. So, for example, number of hits versus the time. So for those who assisted in my 2020 ISP webinar around the CCS implementation approach, those remember this slide. So here is the different element that you need to take into account based on your pharmaceutical quality system. And then, of course, the idea behind is to perform for each sections of your segment. So, for example, in facility, you will look at the layout of the facility, the classifications, and the flow of the material, and etc. So the idea is really to perform your mapping of the process to identify what are the source of contaminations. After that, you perform your risk assessment to assess what is my risk of contaminations. Based on that, you will define what are the measures that need to be in place to reduce this risk if it is too high. Based on that, you define what we call your control plan, and then your monitoring plan. The idea behind is where roles to ensure that the measures that I have put in place works. When we say measures, that means your procedure, your preventive maintenance and corrective maintenance, your system control, etc., that is in place. The monitoring that is in place. Then after, you design, of course, your procedures. Because you have procedures, you have deviations, and because you have deviation, you have kappa and change control. That will feed up to what we call the strategic plan. So that means the plan for continuous improvement, which is clearly stated in the Annex 1. The CCS, the output of the CCS needs to lead to continuous improvement of your pharmaceutical quality system. But for that, you need to perform a data trending and have a holistic view of the different segments into your quality system to understand where you should put your focus. So if we look at the ACA versus this slide, some call it stage 1, or others call it this part, the CCS foundation. And then they call it the stage 2 or the CCS structure. And then we call it the stage 3, that means the CCS output. And the idea of the output is to be able to restructure the CCS foundation or the foundation, or to improve it. Here it's another, Here it's another example of what you can have as the infrastructure. And I will explain why we separate it in two, as the CCS and the infrastructure and the process. The infrastructure means that it's your facilities, your utilities, your equipment, your maintenance, your service provider, and your personnel. And the process will be, of course, is your process, but if you're a CMO, it's the client process. And the process will be the product. So that means you have one process, process design, process validation, the different product excipient and raw material that gets into it, the personnel that is involved into the manufacturing of the product, and of course your primary packaging. With all that, you need for each of those elements to have your quality risk assessment, or develop your process if it is a new process based on quality by design. So that means adequately design the process to prevent any contamination. When you have your quality risk assessment and you have the results, you do have what we call a residual risk, that you are accepting to have this residual risk. And because of that, you're putting the adequate measures and control in place to ensure that this residual risk is under control and still acceptable. And the idea behind is to have your holistic view and holistic trending to be able to feed, I didn't know I can do that, to feed your strategic plan for improvement, and then demonstrate a holistic contamination control versus a predefined performance. And we'll look how the predefined performance can be set, or your objective can be set. Here it just explained for a multi-product facility, and we had a few discussions with different experts and also industry. And I had the chance to review some of those CCS documents. So I had the chance to see the best of it and those who are more simplistic, let's say. The idea behind is when you have multi-product, instead of having one CCS and one document that contains everything, the idea is really to try to have your document that contains the high-level information and the critical information, not the details, and not try to have in your CCS what the guidelines is saying. You may just refer to the guideline rather than to copy-paste the guideline and then say what you are doing. And so the idea behind is to have a main CCS that covers the infrastructure that will be the same for the different processes that you may have. And then to have either sub-CCS or annexes to this main CCS or attachment that contains the part of the product. And we will see how you can do that in the next slides. Before we go to the next slide, let me first do a little poll. So the first question is around, have you started drafting your CCS document? And what is the way you will consider in documenting your CCS? So what it means is the document will only refer to existing SOP and any other document like risk assessment or FMEA. Is the document will focus on referencing only risk assessment measures and controls and residual risk justification and critical control trends. So that's mean what are the controls or that you will be, or what are the data that you will be trending. And then we have the third answer is around the document will integrate justification of some specific approaches, not cover in the Annex 1 or where the Annex 1 is asking you to cover it, plus the point B. So that's mean the second answer, which is this one. It's not the answer, I'm just showing what is point B. And then the document will focus on the evaluation of the measures and the control in place and how to improve contamination prevention, plus the point C, which is this point C. Hopefully it makes sense.
Can everyone see the poll?
I can see it.
Okay. Okay, good. Okay, great. So we can see the results coming up.
So can everyone see also the results on my screen?
Yes.
Yes. Okay. Perfect. So that's quite interesting. So yes for 47%, no for 47%, and then there is no need for current process, example non-sterile. So 7% doesn't need to have it. Okay, it's good to have you. What is the way you will consider in documenting your CCS? The document will only refer to existing SOP and documents. So let's discuss this one. Here, I guess, is the document will be referring to risk assessment and control trending. So that's the point B. And then the document will integrate the justification of some specific plus the point B. And then the document will focus on the evaluation and control in place and how to improve contamination prevention plus the point C. Okay, good. So hopefully at the end of the presentation, you will be able to revisit your answer on the point on the question number 2. So, like I said, like the Annex 1 is saying, sorry, is CCS, to develop the CCS, you really need to have a depth knowledge of your processes. And it makes sense that it is important that it's a cross-functional teams that develop that. And then, however, for documenting the CCS or even implementing the CCS, this will depend on what we say, the maturity and the experience in contamination control by the manufacturer. So if you are, for example, a new facility in sterile manufacturing with little experience, and this is from the guidelines of the ECA, what we suggested is for you, stage 1 is really to restart or start identifying what it needs to be done and perform your gap assessment of what do you have and what you should have to pass to the stage 2. You need to really apply the QRM principle and perform your mapping and perform those risk assessment that you may not have, and prepare the documentation. And how do you know if you have it or not, those risk assessment? I would advise to review the Annex 1 and reread it. I did not take some sentences from the Annex 1 in this presentation because I'm more thinking that everyone has already read it. But however, in the Annex 1, there's few sentences around, for example, in the lyophilizer, you need to ensure sterility inside. For the wraps, you need for the wraps or the isolator, and you need to ensure gloves integrity and the frequency. And that gives you some idea of what you can do, if where you should be focusing your critical controls. If the site has a mature state in the contamination control, in that case, this site will more revisit their critical the critical controls, let's say like that. Revisit if what they have in place versus the current Annex 1, and as the gap assessment, is complying with the current Annex 1, and then just prepare some rationale if there is some gap, or even implement the adequate measures if they found the gap to be very high. And then you have manufacturers that have a great knowledge in contamination control, and then that may have already the CCS, but it's not compiled, it's not fully compiled in a one document. And in that case, those manufacturers can directly go to the stage 2 and perform the compilations on all those data in one document. So when someone is coming from the outside and reading this document, has a clear understanding based on your processes, based on your facility, what are the critical measures that is put in place to prevent contamination, and what are the critical controls that is put in place, and how you are evaluating this holistic view on how the performance and the effectiveness of your measures is being implemented. So in the guidelines, there is also an example of a gap assessment. I know it's very little, so I just redevelop it here. So the idea of the step 1 is to relook, and you will have it into the template of the ECA. But the idea is to restate what are the different elements of the Annex 1. What are you doing in your facility, and where are the gaps? And of course, we received that from a manufacturer from the team. And of course, what she and he told us is, you need to make sure that the different people and different SMEs with their knowledge perform themselves with the team on the floor, the different gap analysis, and confirm if there is a gap or not. Based on the gap that they have identified, they may revisit their contamination control program and then identify how they will fill the gap. It's up to you to decide whether first you fill the gap and then perform your CCS, or to perform directly your CCS. Someone told, I was in a conference this week that during in Singapore, and I like what someone told. It's an ex-FDA inspector, and what he told is, his name is Peter. What he told is, it's better to do good with what you have rather than to trying to do best and not having something. So I think it's better to have your CCS and your gap assessment together, and saying that the gap assessment is part of your improving of your contamination control, and then implementing your different element of the gap assessment, at least based on what he said. So for the ECA template, the idea was really to summarize how a company approach each element of the different point of the Annex 1, or even more if you have other contaminant, and we will look at that, and how do they maintain it to an adequate level. So let me go in more deeper of what is the template. So what you will be saying is, here some screenshot of the template, and here what should be done. And then after each slide, there will be some example of what some manufacturers has done to document their CCS. So the idea behind, just to clearly summarize, the CCS needs to summarize all critical points derived from your QRM, the monitoring, control measure, and details the performance assessment. So that means the evaluations. You want also to justify, and I have seen that in some CCS document, justify why are you accepting this residual risk, for example, for a certain specific process. You want also to understand how you will establish a robust assurance of your contamination prevention when looking holistically. And I will come with the how to look holistically, or at least idea of how to look holistically. Another question, we only have 4 questions, so 2 has been done, so this is the 3rd. Who do you think should have access to the CCS document? All the personnel, mid or senior management, or only the responsible person that releasing the batch? So for example, the qualified person or the quality organization. %, all the personnel, 8% mid senior, and 30% the responsible person. Good, good. So let's go to the answer. What the Annex 1 is saying is that senior management should have an effective oversee of the CCS performance evolution and confirm acceptance of the residual risk through ongoing quality management. So that means through periodic review or through quality performance review, see if the CCS performance and their evolution is as accepted based on the residual risk or based on the performance, previous performance, or based on the performance that they have set. The responsible person for certification or releasing a batch needs to have access to the CCS output. As a qualified person, I think when you have this document and when you have a contamination, you have enough information to know if you can rely on the company quality system, but also on the investigation. I think it's very good for a qualified and even for a person or even for a quality organization to understand the CCS and to read it, to be able to understand where there is a contamination, what went wrong, and is the control that is in place or the measure that is in place working as we think it should be working. At the end, you're right. It's the responsibilities for all the personnel, and all the personnel should have access to this document, and they should understand this document and understand the why this document exists and what is the purpose of this document, because it will drive your strategy on contamination control for the whole site. So if there is a change into the manufacturing because you want to improve your contamination control, so for example, changing a cleaning and disinfection process just to improve your environmental monitoring data, then in that case, it's better to have the operators and also the employee, the different employee, align with the understanding of why you are doing that based on the analysis performed on the CCS. However, the department who should lead that, this is up to the manufacturer. But what is sure is the quality should be involved and should be the final approver of this document. What is also important into the CCS is to define your scope. That means what are the contaminants or possible contaminants from your processes? Is it microbiological? Is it advantage agent like viruses? Is it particulate or others? Others can be hair, insect, chemical residue. Some may justify of including cross-contamination into the CCS. Like for example, for cleaning validation or for cleaning process equipment. I don't think it's a good idea, but if you decide to do it, it's up to you. But I think you need to define the term strategy around it, because the term strategy means you want to improve year over year, or 5 years over 5 years, or even from a period to another period. And this is how we will look on the impact on the performance and analyze the performance of a period over a period rather than the 2D level. Then based on the contaminant, you know what are your specific controls that you should be putting in place. So for example, for microorganisms, you would put the bioburden testing if it is for the product, and EM, environmental monitoring if it is for the environment. But then you have other testing that you can perform, like sterility assurance on the toxin testing, and etc. For Inventors, will be more on the virus, mycoplasma, TCA, BCA, etc. I don't need to go into the detail of that. You already know that. Based on what I just said, you can really imagine that the CCS will be similar to a site master file, where a site master file gets an idea, an overview of what the site is doing, what the site is manufacturing, how the organization is, and what are the different, the facility, the processes, the flows, and the different SOPs or policies that regulate your quality system. It will be the same thing for a site for the CCS, but in that case, it will show where are you doing the productions, so the design of the plan of the process, what are the risk assessment and what are the source of contaminations, what are the measures that you have in place, what are the controls that you have in place, and how you will perform your evaluation. Then, of course, what is the team and what is the communication behind that? So if we go to a high level of the process, you may do that. So you give a high level of the process. So for example, in that case, is sieving, compounding, filling, and lyophilization. You give a little description of each steps. That's an example, okay? You don't have to do it this way. And then you give the batch size. You can even go into more details and giving what are the area and the grade classification where each element or each step is doing, okay? Some may go even in a deeper, and for example, of the filling and the lyophilization will give the size of the final container that will be used for the patient. However, because here it's an upstream process, we don't have that. Then you want to go more into the deep dive of your process steps and assess what are the, based on the flow and the mapping of your process step, what are the source of contamination, what are the measures that you have put in place, and we will see that, and what are the control. And you can also cross-reference to other chapter, and we put it here, to other chapter of your CCS, or even cross-reference to other relevant document that is part of your quality system, like risk assessment or memos or rationale that you have developed. So here is an example of how you can describe your processes. Of course, that's easy. This is a process flow of a drug substance from the sowing to the bulk for aseptic filling. In green means that there is less risk of having a microbial contaminations. In orange, that means there is a risk of contaminations, okay? Micro, viral, or particulates, or even pyrogens. In red, that means you have an activity that is reducing the bioburden or reducing the level of a contaminant. And then in pink that means you are under aseptic or sterile product. And so there is aseptic, of course, in all cases, you will have aseptic manipulation, but here means a more focus on a sterile product. After you have defined your process flow, you can define what are the measures that you have in place. So for example, it's performing closed system. It's performed into the grade D. Why a grade D? Because it's better than a non-classified area, okay? You can explain that, for example, for the working virus seed infection, so for the inoculation step, you are performing into an aseptic connection into a grade A, and then after, for example, the inoculation is performed using a single-use system or an aseptic connections to ensure that you don't contaminate your environment, but also the product. And that's performed, for example, in that case here after in a grade C. which is in a grade A, for example, here in an isolator. Then you have the filtration, then you have the closed system, and then aseptic manipulation and procedure, personnel training and qualification. Then you have what we call, so this is more, when you remember on the CCS foundation, we say infrastructure, process, this focus on the process, this focus on the infrastructure, and the transversal measure focus on both, either the process or either the infrastructure. For example, on the measure for the single-use system, you will look at particles and integrity test before the use. For your clean room, you will perform cleaning and disinfection validation. You will perform your sterilization and etc. And then explain here what are the controls. What you can do, and if you want to develop it more, instead of having the measures here, you can explain the measure and list the measure, and then someone can click on the measure. I don't have that in my slide, but I was thinking that it can be a great idea to do that, is to click on it, and then it brings you to the SOPs, or it brings you to the spec. And then after the spec, it brings you to the SOPs and how to do it and etc. So you can, rather than to use a Word document, you can use other stuff or other software that help you to link and do the linkage between each element. It's just an idea, of course. And then, of course, you have your different controls, and then you can explain what are the different controls here based on your processes, because you already have the different control for the transversal. So for example, here we will perform advanced agent testing, mycoplasma testing. Here we will perform integrity testing and bioburden testing, and etc. And then you can focus also on the processes. What are the CPP that could be affected by a CCS performance? That means, so for example, if the pressure and the flow, for example, on the filtration or sterile filtration or bioburden reduction filtration is not adequate, you know what can happen. So it can reduce the effectiveness of the filter. If the sanitization of the chromatography or the cleaning or the sanitization of the chromatography is not performed properly, this can bring contamination. So those are also critical controls, part of your manufacturing process that you need to control, and then you need to assess, and that you need to justify into your CCS. I hope it gets more clarity. Here it's just a list of documents. I will not go through it, but this is a list of documents that you can have into your CCS, or you can refer into your CCS, from the process, from risk assessment, of measures that you can put in place, and then of controls that you can have, like the PQR, the PQS, and then the controls that you have in your facility that we just discussed in the previous slides. Okay. Then after you have explained how the facility is, how the layout is, what is the area classification of each facility, how the process is performed and the flow of the process in each grade and area, what are the measures, the controls that you have in place, you can give a high level of the different equipment that is being used for the process, and what are the contamination control measures and control or risk assessment referring to those equipment and premises. Again, you want to focus on major equipment like autoclave, washing machine, wraps, isolator, and etc. That has an impact on the CCS. So try to focus always on what are the equipment, what are the material that can have an impact and lead to a contamination, okay? For at least at the end for the final product. You can do the same thing on the personnel. You can do the same thing on personnel monitoring, utilities, and etc. Okay. Again, focus on referencing the relevant document to the contamination, referencing the residual risk and what do you accept, referencing the different quality risk assessment that you have. Okay, quality risk assessment is really different of quality risk management. Quality risk assessment means I'm assessing the risk of a process. What are the risks of contamination? Risk management is how do I manage this risk and how do I accept the risk, the residual risk. Identify for each point what are the critical control points that you will be using to assess the performance of what you have in place. Because we have gazillion of data, and we will see how we can deal with those gazillion data. Annex 1 is, I mean, the CCS in Annex 1 is the only one who's looking at the personnel, and we know that personnel is really the source of contamination. So I think it's a good thing that you focus also on your personnel, not just on the going and on the closing requirement, but also on the training, on the transfer of knowledge, on the understanding of the why they do that and why it's important and how contamination can occur. Good training, and we have seen that, good quality culture, that's mean empowerment of the people, will reduce a lot onto your deviation and onto your contaminations. 2 days ago, I saw a slide that shows that a company with a high quality culture can reduce by 50% the cost due to recurring deviations. But then, of course, what you can also do in each utilities, for example, you can map the process of each utility. So, for example, if we look at the autoclave, which is the part of the sterilization, you look at from the beginning. So the idea is always to look from end to end. Okay, so from feeding water to the usage of the equipment. You can even go further after. Okay, so it's really your process map. And then in that example, if I click on sterilization, it gives me what are the contamination risks. For example, if I have incomplete air removal, if I have non-condensable gases in my chamber, if I have wet steam, or if I have superheated, that can affect the performance of my sterilization cycle and therefore bring to contamination. Therefore, based on those and based on my risk assessment, I will put those measures. For example, draining, I will clean the draining just to make sure that the drain is removing any condensation of water, and so I don't have, for example, wet steam. I will check the leakage and perform leakage. I will perform the qualification of the autoclave by performing mapping temperature and etc. I will make sure that I perform controls by demonstrating that I have air removal using either an air removal detector or a Boedic test. Perform weekly or bi-weekly, whatever your frequency is. I should not say frequency. What is your leak test is being performed. However, the Annex one is asking for having demonstrate a daily removal of air and weekly of the leakage. The steam quality, you need to demonstrate it. So that's your control. And then your KPIs, or what is your quality performance indicator, will be micro on the toxin, pass-fail Boedic, or pass-fail sterilization cycle. That are your critical controls. Maybe the critical controls is not the three, is only one, pass-fail Boedic or pass-fail sterilization cycle. So you will have here, in that case, just to remember, pass-fail means it's a binomial variable, okay? I'm bringing some statistic because you will see why it's important to have some statistic at the end. Then, of course, we do the same thing. You will look at your raw material. Any raw material that enter, we all know that if you enter something of good quality in your processes, you will have the output will be good quality. If you bring something that is contaminated, and we have seen raw material being contaminated, and the control in place didn't see it, and then when you do your process, you start to see some contamination, and when you do your investigation, you start to see, oh, it comes from the supply. Okay, it's not always the supply. Then after that, you have also to explain a little bit about your processes. So for example, container closure integrity, and justify why you are doing those controls. Okay, it's important to justify the controls, why you are doing those controls. And I will show you with the CCIT, because I think with the CCIT is clear on why I should use one test over another test. Okay, in some example, you only have one test in some processes. Okay, and try also to explore when you are doing your CCS, explore the use of modern technology or new technology. Why? Because it will help you. I'll show you this example. So for example, for the CCIT test before, we were taking a number of samples of vials or syringes and performing the CCIT test either over pressure or deep pressure or by using the blue dye test. Now, there is new, for example, there is new companies that have nothing to do with those companies, okay? No benefit of anything. But there is some companies like Wilco, in that case, that is capable to have a machine that is linked to your filling machine, that is capable to perform the CCIT of each of the compound or a certain frequency of your vial, either by vacuum, pressure, headspace analysis, okay? The idea behind is it performed directly. However, with the CCIT test, in that case, if your vial has been filled into a non-atmospheric or non-oxygen environment, like for example in N2 or azote, sorry, in that case, you may not want to do a direct CCIT test, except if you have a LFC methods that is capable to see directly if there is between the headspace and the liquids, if there is, and the liquids if there is any leakage. But if you use, for example, the headspace analysis in that case, you don't have enough time between the process and the testing to see if there was a leakage. So therefore, it's better for that case in this type of process to do a laboratory test or to perform to allow a certain time to have exchange of the gases to perform your CCIT test. That's the justification, for example, what I just said, the justification that you need to put into your CCS to justify why are you using this method over another method, okay? Then, of course, you should focus also on the vendor approval and also your primary packaging and also outsources services like, for example, QC, sterilization, and etc. The same thing you want to do is to perform your process map or your supply chain map, what we call the supply chain map, where you take over the different element of your processes. So, for example, incoming material, supplier A, B, C, D, drug substance, drug product, VI, packaging, storage, dispatch. We look at the CCS, the scope of the CCS will be from the incoming material, what are the testing that I'm performing, what are the scope, micro, maybe, advantageous agent for the DS, if you receive, for example, your working back cells or your master or the viruses, if it's not you who's developing those elements, particulate or even others, okay? The same thing will be for the drug substance. What are the reference labs or the outsources services? Okay. And then you can even deep dive on it after you have done your CCS scope. What are the CCS, what are the measures or what are the risk of contamination of each supplier? What are the specification of each supplier? And so, for example, you can have that. You click on this supplier. It gives you, for example, it's a single use equipment, material. What are the measures that I have in place? I have qualified the supplier. One, tick the box. Second, I'm performing a visual inspection before use. I'm performing a test integrity before use to ensure that there is no risk. Okay, I'm performing the visual inspection by looking the integrity or looking if there is any particles. If the element has not been cleaned or sterilized, I'm checking if it has been sterilized. If it's not, then I'm checking if I have to clean and sterilize, etc. That's what you need to have. So really stay high level. The document needs to be can or should be around 30 to 50 pages maximum. And please don't copy paste in your CCS the different SOPs, because when you change the SOP, that means you have to change the CCS all the time. And at one point, you will have two living documents that is different. So try to use more cross-references rather than copy pasting what you have in your existing documentation. Then the last part is, and the most important part of the CCS is, how do you demonstrate continuous improvement based on the information derived from above? That means from all what we just discussed. How do you identify what are the elements of control? And how do you demonstrate the correlations or the link between different controls or different KPIs that you have in place? And my suggestion is we should, rather than doing tendency analysis over a period, is to compare performance of a period over another period. And so to perform a performance over a period to another period, you can't do tendency. Tendency analysis or regression analysis will not help you. You need some statistic, and you need complex statistic because you have too much data and too much information coming in. I'll show you an example. So before I show you the example, sorry, I didn't see that. Let me ask you the question. What do you think is the CCS objective? Look at the past performance, look at past performance and predict the future, or more being adaptive performance analysis by comparing performance over time and predicting future performance. What I mean by the last one is adaptive performance means it will be able to compare past performance over a certain period of time and predict the future performance. Some may say this, the B and the C can be the same, and I do agree. Oh, everyone wants to go to the adaptive performance. I guess you know what it means then. nobody wants to look at the past performance. That's interesting, at least because they're looking at the past performance to do the future performance. Okay, good. Sorry, brainstorming in myself, it seems so. So let me show you something before we go to the next slide. So what we did is we tried to develop try to compare and try to understand what is the linkage between, for example, in this example, what is the linkage between contaminations versus the point where the personnel is and versus the ID and versus the production stage, okay? If you use Excel sheet, it's a little bit complex to do that, okay? So Excel sheet is like your, for those who likes watch, is like your quartz watch. And then this software that we use is Power BI, is like a better watch, okay? It's not the Rolex or the Patek, it's just a better watch, okay? A Tissot, for example. So it's your entry level for luxury. What it gives you here, it's, again, it's a 2-level. Number of CFU versus time. Number of CFU versus time. Number of CFU versus time and the type of analysis or email, okay? Here is just your filters. And here is the different points that you have to sample. And here is your ID, okay? The advantage with Power BI, I'm saying the advantage, but you will see at the end, I will say it's not so advantage of that. The advantage of the Power BI is if you click on mask, for example, it will show you where did you have a contamination on mask and what are the production stage that has been impacted, okay? And where it is. When I look at this graph and I look at here, it doesn't give me the performance, okay? It just gives me an idea where was the contamination based on my trending that is going up into 2019 first quarter and the second quarter, okay? But that's it. So I think the tool is good for investigation, but it's not good to assess performance. It doesn't mean that because you have an increase here that you were bad. Maybe the activity changes. Maybe you have a higher activity. Maybe you have a higher shift. So the numbers, the proportionality of the number, if you pass it to something more statistic, you may say there is no differences, okay? We did the same thing with another example, and in that case, at least it helps you to have quick results. We show here, okay, contamination time, the type of detection methods, sorry, where the type of sampling method, sorry, where in the manufacturing stage. Here is the control points, and here is the control points for the personnel. Okay, so this is for the equipment, and this is for the personnel. And so if I click, for example, in grade A, it gives me in grade A what happened. I have at least an idea of on RODAC and personnel and passive air. There's some few stuff, and most of it is on filling and capping. Of course, it's a grade A. Okay, and when I look at here, I have most on the point 40 and 9 that I have a high concentration of contaminations. Okay. What it gives me? Good. 2 for investigation, for further investigation, to focus my investigation at least, where I should be focusing to improve my micro. Does it give me the performance of how good I am, for example, from 2021 to 2022? No. Yeah, you can do a tendency, but this will not give you the holistic view. Imagine you have to do that for your EM, then you have to do that for your water system, then you have to do that for your steam, then you have to do that for, if you have too many graphs, you don't see anything. You see it in silo. The same thing for the grade B. So where I want to go is, if we look into tendency analysis and control chart as we are looking, we will be looking into some silo, and we will need the people to subjectively assess if there is a link between each of them. I think, and again, is what I think is, I think it's a future challenge, but there is tools that allow us to overcome those challenges, and I'll show you after. I think we need to be more into the data science and more into the statistic, okay? I am very bad in statistics, so I had to learn the statistic to be able to understand what is going on and how I can develop that, because I'm part of the A3P CCS, and I need to discuss around how to develop a dashboard. So I had to learn a lot about statistics, and I think it's amazing. And I think the future is for any manager and anyone that takes decision, they need to understand the statistic. Otherwise, numbers, you can say whatever you want with the numbers, But if you bring statistics, what happens is you bring the numbers into, you're comparing apples to apples. That's the important thing. And you can even put hypotheses and say, do I have a link or a correlation between exclusion in a grade A versus exclusion in grade B, or versus the personal or versus the water contamination, etc. You do have qualitative and quantitative variable and binomial variable. So for micro, you will have to use binomial macro, pass or fail, because it's micro. But for particles, for example, during your visual inspection, it's very easy, because your distribution of reject and distribution of the reject is always a normal distribution. So you can easily assess your PPK, your CPK, and your performance, and etc. That's the way you should be doing. I say should, okay? Here it's an example of a software named Lyra by Saphir that is capable to look at multiple information and to provide you, in that case, a graph. You will say, hey, well, this is a control shaft. I mean, I can do it. You're right, you can do it. But now if we go even further, you remember in 2020, I told you, I think the way to do it is to be able to assess based on each boxes, water system, steam, etc., and then having a higher level based on facility, utilities, and etc. From one means I'm very good in controlling my micro, my contamination. And in 5, I need to improve my processes. So what they do is they consider all the different parameters about the 3 holes, so the specification and the classification concern, in that case, for a clean room and their equipment. And based on that, they put some level of priority. So for example, 1 to 5, or A to C, or A, B, C, that's my 3 hole. Below C, I'm not anymore under the control, and I need to take action to go back to A, okay? And so here in that case, it gives you how the performance of all your clean rooms and equipment, which is in your infrastructure, is performing. Is it A, B, and C? So you can put a ponderation. For example, for EM environment, you will have a ponderation of 5. For example, for particulate in the grade AD, it will have a ponderation of 1 because it have a less effect. For example, I'm giving an example, okay? For your equipment, am I qualified? Do I have the right controls? Is there any contamination, etc.? So it will take it more holistically. But to do that, you need a lots of data. You need a lots of number and data. The most important things is if you're using Excel sheets as your entry for your system and not using, for example, computer system like a server on SQL, and even if you are using that, you need to make sure that your data are properly assessed and cleaned before you start analyzing. What I mean by clean, so when you look at an Excel sheet, you have the date. Some people put the day and the month. Some people put a range of a date. I don't know why, but they put a range of a date. And then when you put the hour, start of the hour, instead of putting the start, they put a range of a start, etc. So this, you need to make sure it's clean. And you need to make sure that to be able to do the linkage between grade A, grade B, grade C, for example, you want to make sure that each input and the way the Excel or the way the document is completed is the same. Date is date, start date, contamination, number of CFU, and ID, okay? Otherwise, you lose too many time, and for developing just the Power BI, we lost 3 weeks just for cleaning data over 1 year, okay? So you need to make sure that you have enough, your data and your input is absolutely correct. Otherwise, like a statistician always say, garbage in, garbage out. I hope it helped and clarify. So based on that, how do you think a holistic assessment of the CCS performance and contamination control effectiveness is possible? Do you think if we still use the current approach of trending performance like the PQR, CPV, historical element data, and etc. will be working? Or do we need to use more complex statistics and data science? So 62% still saying that you need to use current approach of trending performance. and 38% thinks that we can go for more complex statistic and data science. Good. So I guess we will see after a few years what is the right answer. And again, I think there is no right answer. I think it depends on your complexity of your processes and the complexity of your manufacturing sites. So by that, what I do think is based on this answer, and the answer shows it, is you will have two types of CCS. The one that still stays on the basic statistical model and two-level trending and look at the past. Because by trending, you're looking at the past and you think how good you were in the past. You may think how good you are, or you will be in the future, but you don't have any certainty. With more advanced and statistic, where it brings more of the statistic, the machine learning, or the artificial intelligence. I don't know if you want to bring all that, but at least with more advanced statistic, you may have an understanding of how your future is, and especially if you have enough periods to show and how better you could be and how good you could be. The idea behind is when you bring changes in your processes, you want to make sure it's properly logged into your CCS, or at least it's logged properly into the timeline. So you know what are the changes that can or have affect your performance. Okay, that's very important. Otherwise, you will never understand why you have changes. Okay, so this is why your change control process and even the deviation process needs to integrate the fact that you may need to revisit your CCS or relog into your CCS why I did this change and how this change may impact my performance. Will it improve it? Will it reduce it? Or will it be neutral? That's up. You may decide it at the beginning of the change control, but then you need to demonstrate it. And to demonstrate it, if you were right, it's like in a hypothesis. You will do a change, you do an hypothesis that it will bring better effectiveness on the controlling micro. And then when you look at your performance, you see the contrary. Okay? Or you confirm your hypothesis. So with that, I mean, I hope it gives more granularity around the CCS and how to document your CCS. I can't give details of it. Otherwise, I may share confidential information from customers. But at least I hope this will help you in how to develop. You do have the ECA template. It is a template. That means you can adapt it whatever you want it based on your processes and based on your manufacturing. So I would like to thank also the ECA task force team for their jobs, for the work they have done, and also for allowing me this opportunity to present. So we had manufacturers from the industry. We had also a GMP inspector, Renaud Gilles from Germany. We had also Vimal Sadeva from the WHO, who supported us on the writing of this guideline. Thank you very much for your listening. And if there is any question, please feel free to ask. Thank you,
Walid. So would anyone like to post a question on the chat or unmute yourself?
Do I need to look at the chat? Oops.
So far, we didn't get any questions. We've got some thank yous. Okay, let's see. We have from Vimal says excellent presentation. Does anyone have a question that they'd like to pose?
Don't be shy.
This is your golden opportunity. We have quite a bit of time actually.
I think there was a question actually, Linda.
Oh, was there? Let's see.
It's further up.
Or was it to you?
I don't see any.
It might have been to you, Christy.
I have a question. Oh yeah, that was to me. Okay. When should
Al1 has a question, which has just been posted. So thank you for that. Who should be the caretaker of the CCS document?
Yeah, I think it's the quality who should be the caretaker or someone in the organization, but it should be the quality department who should take care of the document. That's mean who should lead the development of it. Some manufacturer may say for the operations, but at the end the quality needs to have the oversight of this document and then finally approve it. Okay. Some manufacturer will use more global and corporate that will help into the design of the template and then ask for the manufacturer or for the sites to do it. But at the end, I think it should be the quality that have the full oversight of what is happening, because it should be part of your quality ongoing verification of your performance. Who should own the CCS from Pirna? Again, it's this. Yeah, I guess you're just reiterating the question. Okay.
So Wei-Ling asks, when should we start performing a CCS for a product transfer project? Basic design phase, detailed design phase, or qualification phase?
I would say at the beginning, developing at the beginning, because an example is when I just finished one with an isolator. So a company purchased a new isolator, and so what they did is they did the same process as for your CCS. So they did a CCS for the isolator. Look at what is the process inside, okay? And for that, you have to absolutely understand why you are doing that, what will be your processes, and etc. I understand a new company may not know all that at the beginning, but for those who knows, you want to know what is your process, map the process, assess the risk, and based on your CCS, where are the measures that you need to have, and what are the controls, and where you will put in your sampling points. If you need to clean the isolator, for example, do you need a spray balls and etc. All that needs to be even in the basic design, and then you complete it during your design phase, IQ, OQ, PQ, and etc. And you complete it and then confirm if it is still the same, the level, or if you need to add other measures and control. So from the beginning. What is the recommended review frequency of the CCS? I would say there is none. It should depend on your first, if you have any changes. So let's say an example. You have any changes during the year that may lead to an increase in your residual risk, or even in your reduce in your residual risk, and may lead to a review of the CCS. Or if you have put to yourself a certain threshold of number of contamination during your routine. So for example, if you say, if I have too many contamination, recurring contamination, I need to perform an investigation, and based on that, put the kappa that will revisit the CCS. If you don't have any problems, let's say like that, and everything is under control, like it is say in the annex, it should be part of your ongoing review, periodic review, or quality, site quality review, whatever you call it. And stated that there is no changes, it doesn't impact, so we don't review it. Okay, but there is no clear frequency, but you can say every year and keep the changes, log the changes, and then at the end of the year, for example, review the document if it is needed. Okay, but the idea is to make this document living. It has to be living, because any changes that you bring needs to bring a change to the CCS, or at least confirm that there is none. Who should own the CCS? Quality, but again, quality as a quality. But in the reality is everyone should own the CCS. If not, then if it's only quality who own it, that's mean, what I mean by own it is mean they are the leader of it, okay? So they are the leader to making sure the document is being filled, the document is being respected, the document is being trained. But own it means, in my situation, own it means I own it, I read it, I understand it, and I know why it's here. This needs to be for all personnel. It's not just operation and quality, even the maintenance, even the person, even the validation people. Everyone needs to own the CCS and need to understand. Is the CCS required for IMP? I think I have read into the Annex 1 that it may be applicable for some stages of clinical phases. But at least you can have it for your infrastructure, but not for the process. You see what I mean? So your infrastructure will be the same. So you can have a high-level CCS. But at the end, Annex 1, Phase 1, Phase 2, you do have a specific guidelines on IMP and on clinical stage product. So you may refer to that. And if you elect to choose the Annex 1, then you can choose the Annex 1. What is the first step to kickstart the development of the CCS? The first step is to have everyone together and on agreeing on the fact that you will start your CCS. And then the first step is to look at first you have a big elephant is your facility and processes. So I will look at first what are the documents that is performing your gap assessment, and see what are the existing documents that you have in place that you can use into the CCS. And based on that, if there is gap, fill the gap and integrate it into the CCS. I would suggest to follow the template of the ECA to help you to cut this elephant or cut the elephant into a different part. I'm sorry for saying elephant, but in Europe we say cut the elephant, so it's easier. It's a French word, sorry. Those sterility assurance program is replaced by CCS. It's not replaced by CCS. Sterility assurance program is part of the CCS, if you want to look at it like that. Because CCS will encompass the sterility assurance plus the contamination control, the process, etc., etc. Well, yes, if your sterility assurance, and this is what I was saying with a manufacturer that has a high maturity, if your sterility assurance program is what you called it today, but encompass not just sterility, but also micro particles, antigen, advantageous agent, contamination, then yes, you just replace the name by sterility assurance, by CCS, and have a holistic document if it already exists. How to evaluate our CCS strategy is effective or not? This is what I just discussed around the, you have two ways of doing that. The first way is what we discussed, is you will identify, for example, critical elements. So for example, you would say, I'm giving it the first step, okay? The first way, you will look at in routine, the number of contamination in grade A. And you say, for example, I don't want to have more than 1% or more than 0.1%, okay? The number of complaints, the number of reject batches, the number of contamination water, the number of media fit that has been fed, or the number of operators that have been fed. You can look at that and try to assess if the performance is good. Or you can go even beyond, is to look at all that and look at where are the failure in each of those elements that I just listed, and see how is the number of failure that you have during a 1 year with compared to another year with the same activity. That can be done. Or it's like a PQR, okay? The CCS is like your PQR, but it's more focused, and thank you for the person who put the PQR, it helped me to get it. But it's like your PQR. It just focus on not the process performance, but focus on the performance of preventing contamination, okay? So this is how you should demonstrate the CCS effectiveness. Either you look at the number of non-compliance versus activity and process over time, or either you try to link it and to try to do a B, C, D, E, F, G, like I showed you, to say how good you are in an overall, based on a ponderation of the different elements, okay? I don't know where I'm, okay. How to evaluate our, okay, that's already this. What is the best approach to start the CCS? I think I have responded to this question on the, what is the first step to kickstart the development of a CCS. Make sure you have all the people, and it's a cross-functional team. Make sure also it's not just a top-down document. It has to be a top-down and a down-top. So involve the operators, involve the people who do the work, okay? The people who stays in the office, only if they are only involved into doing the CCS, you will be missing a lot of stuff. So involve the people that is in the field. That's important. They know the process better than anyone else. is the people who are in the field. Okay. So I guess for the kickoff, make sure those people are in, and also you will win the buy-in from those people. Can we use similar process for non-sterile? Yes, of course. You can use and focus maybe when for the micro is different for the sterile. You don't have the endotoxin, but for the macro, you may look at the what we call the objectionable microorganisms. So yes, you can. Is it mandatory? No, but if you choose and elect to use it, good. As you say, no rules for the CCS periodicity, but will it become annually like the peak year or not? I don't know if it will become annually. I mean, I guess if auditors start to audit facilities and start to see you never review your CCS, they will ask you to put a certain frequency, and by default, you will put a frequency of annually. By doing that by default annually, at least you are safe, because you're saying I'm reviewing it annually. But if you say that, I would suggest to say I review it annually, but if there is any things or any changes that may lead to a review, it will be reviewed, okay? Because it has to be a living document. So to be on the safe side, you can say I review it annually. But I don't think it's a mandatory thing, okay? But it has to be a living document. That means it will be reviewed more than annually. Please take a few moments to share your feedback with us. No, I think it's something else, sorry. Link to the PowerPoint and the recording will be provided. Thank you, thank you. What is the level of acceptance accepted from the FDA and other regulatory authorities? Are there any foreseeable impact to dossier submission, Module 3, or would this be limited to local document like a VMP? Oh, that's a good question. What is the level of acceptance accepted from the FDA and the other regulatory? I think so. And the CCS is you are the one who puts the level of acceptance of your CCS based on your product, based on the patient. You are the only one who can do that. What the FDA will look, or what the authority will look, is what you have put in place is working and is adapted for your process. So for example, if you have done so that means, have you done a proper risk assessment? Have you identified the right contamination? Is the measure and the control that you have been put in place is working? So let's take an example. If you have too much contamination, that means the controls that you have in place and the measure that you have in place is not working. Especially the measure is not working. And if you have recurring, that means that your investigation, the training of the people, and etc., and the processes is not working. That means that your CCS is not working. That's what it means, and this is how they can challenge. By the way, hello Vimal. Good to read you. Do you think it should be for the moment? Sorry. For the moment, I don't think there is anything around the fact that the CCS needs to be in the dossier of submission on the Module 3. They may ask it, but I don't think it will be. So sorry, let me rephrase it. It's not as mandatory to put it in the dossier of submission and in the Module 3. However, you can refer to, if you have one, you can refer to it and put it into the summary of the Module 3, because it's a summary of what you are doing, okay? And generally in the Module 3, you will put your CPPs, your controls, and etc. You don't want to enter too much in the details into your Module 3, because you know what happens when you enter too much in the details. Any change, you need to review your dossier. So you don't want that. You don't want to have that too, okay? So I think it should be more like a VMP and more like a local document rather than a submission to authorities. And then for authorities, when they come to audit you to see the document. Cheap line. I don't have a question for the CCS, but can I question about cross-contamination with beta-lactam plant? Okay. Can I manufacture amoxicillin the same time with amoxicillin clavicans acids in another room use the same HU utility? If not, how can? I don't know where you are located, but I know in Europe, if you use antibiotics and beta-lactam plants and etc., it has to be separated plants or separated HVAC units. If I perform a risk assessment, you can perform your risk assessment, and if you demonstrate there is no risk of cross-contamination possible with even the same HU utilities, then you may be able to justify. But I will first look at your local, national laws, because there is some national laws, at least in Europe, there is some national laws that doesn't allow that. Okay, it appears that the CCS for existing process might be less challenging to implement as compared to altogether a new process. How should we strategize our approach for a successful implementation for new process? Excellent question. I think, you know, I would say it's even easier for a new process because, but you're right. I mean, with the existing processes, everything is already there. So the only thing you have to do is pick it up and put it up, and then confirm it's working. With a new process, you have the chance to learn from previous mistake or to learn from experience. And the way you should be doing is exactly the same way. Map the process, and in that case, design the process with the understanding of what is the CCS based on the Annex 1. The Annex 1 gives you lots of information about how to prevent contamination. What are the frequency, or what are the measuring guidance value? And then based on that, based on the design of your process, when you design your process, so you have an imaginary design process, perform the risk assessment of this imaginary process before even implementing the process. Perform your risk assessment and try to understand what are the risks of contamination. And if I have high risk of contamination, maybe I need to redesign the process before even going to measures and control. See if I can redesign the process, if I can redesign the facility, or if I can put redesign the facility or have other system in place to reduce this risk, because it's still a new process. And if it's a green field, it's even better. Okay, so that's what it brings. The CCS is bring from the is exactly the same as the question when I have a new process or a new facility, do I put it in the design phase or in the IQQ? Put it in the design phase. It's the same thing with a new product. But if you are implementing a new product into an existing facility, like for example a CMO, in that case, you know your infrastructure's performance. So the idea is to focus on the process and how you can adapt the process on the infrastructure to give the better and to give the better of the CCS. That would be harder, I agree, for a new process in that case, because if the facility is old or if the process of the infrastructure is old, or not easily to be adapted, that can be a challenge. My pleasure, Vima.
We have 5 minutes left. If anyone has any last question to add or any comments. Otherwise, the PowerPoint, the PDF of this session will be sent to everyone who registered. If you haven't registered, then please give us your email address and name and company so we can follow up. And I think we've got one more workshop coming up under the STERIS series later on this year in November. And we'll have more details of that and send that out. If there's no other question, I think we're going to let Walid enjoy his last evening in Singapore.
Thank you.
Before you fly back.
Thank you.
And thank you very much for always sharing your knowledge with us. And it's been great to have you join us this evening. I wish everyone else who's joined us and can stay till the end to a good evening, and thank you all. And we look forward to next time that we can meet.
Thank you, everyone. Have a good day.
Thank you, everyone. Bye. Good night.